Hello everyone, welcome to What If Quirkless Deku was son of All for One and got All for One movie. Before we start, please go support AleahLRB for writing that awesome fanfic. It has been nearly a decade since the presence of the villain that ruled Japan's underworld was last felt. The villain All for One just suddenly vanished one night, not to be heard of again by heroes, villains, and criminals alike. That is until Toshinori Yagi, Almight himself and All for One's arch nemesis, happened to meet the villain out in the open, and with a 9-year-old child in his arms no less. Just what the hell is going on? Izuku Midoriya has All for One. Izuku and Tamura are brothers. All for One is no longer a villain. Chapter 1, Unexpected Meeting. Toshinori froze. His eyes went wide in shock and surprise as they met with the eyes of the man that seemingly just disappeared from the face of the earth years ago. The man also looked surprised to see Toshinori, though he wasn't making it as obvious as Toshinori was. Instead, he kept his composure, making sure that the two members of his family nearby wouldn't notice. Of course, he also didn't want to accidentally wake up the small sleeping child within his arms. Hisashi-kun! A gentle woman's voice suddenly called out to the man, causing him to break eye contact with Toshinori to look over to her instead. The woman had dark green hair and dark green eyes, along with freckles on her cheeks that both formed the shape of diamonds, all features that their youngest son, the little one that Hisashi held, had inherited. Hisashi's expression softened and he almost laughed at the scene that he saw. His beloved wife trying to push their confused oldest son towards what seemed to be the direction of the clothes that fit the age range of the young teenager. "We'll just be over there picking clothes for Tenko, okay? Go find a place to sit down with Izuku so you can rest too," his wife told him while continuing to push their son, but the 14-year-old Tenko just seemed plain out reluctant. "But Mom, didn't you just get me new clothes last week? My closet will be full before we know it at this rate," their son protested. "Yes, but the clothes over there look like they'll fit you perfectly. All the girls at your new school will absolutely fall for you," the teenager's mother cheerfully stated. "MOM," Tenko yelled in an embarrassed and scolding tone as his face became flush. His mom just giggled at his reaction, however. "We'll meet with you and Izuku later, Hisashi-kun," Inko brightly told her husband as she waved bye to him. Hisashi waved bye back to his wife and son as well, but in a manner not as animated as his wife in fear that he'll disturb his son's sleep. He then looked over to the light blue-skinned chauffeur that had been accompanying them, and he gave him orders. "Follow them and make sure they're safe." The chauffeur placed his hand on his chest as he bowed before proceeding to follow his master's wife and son. Hisashi watched as the chauffeur made his way to keep guard of Inko and Tenko, and once he was sure the light blue-skinned Noma had met up with his wife and son, only then did he resume eye contact with the number 1 pro hero, who still looked surprised and confused like before, but now had his guard raised as high as the heavens. Hisashi just gave the pro hero a bored and slightly annoyed glare before suggesting to the hero, "Why don't we go to a cafe nearby so we can sit down and talk?" Toshinori immediately tensed up at the suggestion. His brows furrowed and he clenched his fist as he prepared himself for a possible fight. Hisashi simply raised an eyebrow at the pro hero, however. "I'm not foolish to even think of starting a fight against you while I'm holding my sleeping son in my arms and while my wife and eldest are just some meters away, Toshinori. I had assumed you weren't stupid enough to start a fight with me while being surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of civilians here as well, but maybe that part of our situation had simply flown over your head." Hisashi jeered at the pro hero before turning on his heel to head to the exit of the mall's department store. Toshinori's fist loosened a little as he realized the man's point, and he calmed himself down as he watched Hisashi walking away from him. His guard was still raised, but he felt some easiness in the fact that All for One, like him at that moment, had something that would be holding him back. He was grateful for that fact. As they walked, Toshinori made sure to follow close behind All for One. The possibility of the man in front of him trying to escape him at that moment seemed relatively low considering the circumstances, but Toshinori was not willing to risk it. He wasn't planning on letting the man out of his sight for even 1 second only for him to disappear from the face of the earth all over again. As the number one hero continued to glare at the back of Hisashi's head, however, his gaze soon managed to find its way to the small sleeping child whose head was resting on his father's shoulder, and whose arms were wrapped and dangling around the man's neck. The child looked a lot like the woman Toshinori saw before, with his green hair and the freckles on his cheeks that formed the shape of diamonds. The only difference would probably be the fact that this child had curly hair, which from Toshinori's observation, he had actually gotten from All for One. Toshinori couldn't see the child's eyes since he was asleep, so it made him wonder whether he had inherited his father's red eyes, or green eyes like his mother. The other kid actually looked a lot more like All for One, Toshinori noted in his mind, light-colored hair and red eyes. Ahem. The man in front of Toshinori cleared his throat, immediately snapping the hero out of his thoughts and making him realize that they had arrived inside the cafe and were already standing beside an empty table. Hisashi just looked at him with a partly bored, partly annoyed expression as Toshinori stood there with a stupid expression. "Yeah," Toshinori could only say before finally sitting down with the man carrying the child sitting down as well soon after. A female server walked up to their table not soon afterwards, and while Toshinori only asked for a cup of water, the other man, after asking for a cup of water as well and ordering a plate of assorted cookies, ordered the most expensive coffee in the cafe's menu. He had also asked for his cup of water and the cookies to have lids when brought to them. Toshinori was slightly taken aback at the request and order by the man before him, and even though the server seemed relaxed about the order as she spoke, he could tell she was also slightly taken aback by the interaction. Hisashi smiled and spoke politely and lightly to the server that whole time, which unnerved Toshinori and almost made him retch knowing who the person in front of him truly is. But the moment the server left to bring their orders to the kitchen, the man's demeanor immediately changed. The man's polite smile completely disappeared, and he just looked at Toshinori with a bored look before finally getting to the reason for their trip to that cafe. "Please, ask away, Toshinori. I'll be glad to answer any question you have." Hisashi slightly smiled at Toshinori as he said that last sentence, but the smile wasn't one of glee or mirth. In fact, it seemed to be mocking Toshinori. Toshinori furrowed his brows almost immediately at the white-haired man's smile, and he immediately hit the man with a direct question. "Is this all a ploy? Your family, I mean. Are they just a ploy for you to get something?" Hisashi's mocking smile turned to a more neutral smile, and he asked the number one hero. "Now why would you think my family is part of some type of ploy? Can't someone like me just settle down after a while, Toshinori? Each of us is entitled to start a family of our own, are we not?" The white-haired man's rhetorical questions made Toshinori grimace, and he couldn't help but be angered by his statements. "It's a ploy exactly because it's you, All for One," Toshinori said in an almost loud voice as he tried to slam the table between the two of them, but his fist never landed after Hisashi used one of his quirks to keep his nemesis fist stuck in the air. Hisashi furrowed his brows at Toshinori, and just with a look, he managed to communicate to the blonde hero, "Are you trying to wake my son up, you imbecile?" But not soon after, Toshinori felt his hand be released by whatever quirk Hisashi had used. Toshinori was taken aback by the look, and as he was tending to his hand, flexing it to make sure the man before him didn't play any dirty tricks on it, he just casually cleared his throat as he went back to the topic at hand, and to his point this time making sure to lower his voice. "My point, All for One, is that you have been pursuing rule and control over Japan for almost 2 centuries now. You killed countless people and committed countless crimes just to reach that goal. But now I'm supposed to believe you gave all that up just to raise a family?" Toshinori asked as he clenched his fist. "I won't be easily fooled, All for One." Hisashi was quiet for a few seconds after Toshinori spoke, but he never once broke eye contact with the hero. "Hisashi Midoriya. The white-haired man suddenly said, taking Toshinori aback. What?" Toshinori asked in a confused tone. "Hisashi Midoriya. That's my name," Hisashi explained. "If it's alright with you, please just refer to me as either Hisashi or Midoriya, whichever sounds more comfortable for you to say, and refrain from calling me All for One from this point on. I have been acting courteous to you by referring to you as Toshinori Yagi instead of Almight this whole time, so it's only fair for you to call me by my civilian name as well. Toshinori furrowed his brow slightly at this request, but he couldn't say anything when Hisashi continued to speak. I really have stopped being a villain, Toshinori. I'm no longer all for one. I decided to just be Hisashi Midoriya when Izuku here was born, a plan that I had ever since my first son was born, Hisashi explained. My family is no ploy nor trick nor ruse. They're not part of any intricate plans you believe I have. I just want to live in peace with my wife and my sons. I have said many lies in my long life, Toshinori, many of them said just to fool countless people, but believe me now when I'm telling you that I just want to be here for my family. Chapter 2, Almight Fanba. Toshinori's blonde brows furrowed and his blue eyes seemed to glow in anger as he looked at his nemesis, the greatest evil in Japan, the one who murdered his master. This man right in front of him is responsible for countless lives being lost and ruined. He is responsible for so much suffering in the almost 2 centuries he has lived, but now, he has the gall to suddenly sit in front of Toshinori and tell him that he just wants to be with his family? After all the crimes and atrocities he'd committed, does he honestly believe that he just get to have this? That he deserves to have this? Toshinori grimaced and his hands curled tightly into fists as he glared daggers at Hisashi. The latter, however, just remained silent and unfazed as he looked straight back at the hero. It was at that moment that the female server had came back to bring the 2 men the initial part of their orders. The female server was initially absolutely hesitant to even come near the table at first after feeling the pressure and tension between the 2 men even from meters away, but she had to push on and she placed the 2 cups of water, one with the lid on, onto the men's table, all while trying to hide her hands trembling. Toshinori. Hisashi's voice suddenly rung inside the pro-hero's head, making him grimace and glare daggers even more at the white-haired man. Get out of my head, all for one, Toshinori hissed in his mind. Hisashi just blankly looked at the 7th successor of his younger brother's Quirk before letting out a slightly disappointed sigh. You're scaring the waitress, Hisashi briefly told Toshinori before turning towards the young server and apologizing with a gentle smile and a slight chuckle. Did we scare you? I'm really sorry. It's been a while since my friend and I saw each other, so we're catching up. No PPPPPRABLLM SSS Sirs. GGGGGGAleahLRB TT to HLLP dash. The waitress tried to talk as she forced herself to wear her customer service smile, then still with trembling hands, she placed a plate full of cookies with the lid on the table. Why yo RRCCC cough FFE WWWWYLLLBBBBBR brought TTTSSSSS soon and dash. The waitress added, then she immediately ran away, excused herself from the 2 men's table. Hisashi stifled the urge to laugh at her reaction in his concern that this would simply anger the foolish pro-hero seated across him even more, and he could only just sigh mentally to himself. He also took a peek at the other patrons of the cafe, and he noticed that their presence was greatly souring the people's experience of the place. My. This won't do. Hisashi could only think to himself, I hope this doesn't end up making too much problems for Inko. Hisashi then looked back at Toshinori and through his mind reading Quirk, he was able to quickly tell that this conversation really can't be salvaged anymore. Hisashi thought about ending their conversation short that day and sending Toshinori on his way with the intention of maybe continuing the discussion some other time when the pro-hero has calmed down, but before he could, he heard a heart-melting statement from the mind of none other than the small child in his arms. I can smell Mom's food, the small child thought as he slowly awakened. The child slowly opened his eyes to reveal bright green irises, and as he raised his head, he looked around while rubbing one of his eyes with his rolled-up fist. Oh, we're at a cafe. I thought Mom was making food at home, the child mumbled before turning his head back towards his father's torso and burying his face onto his dad's shirt. Izuku? Are you still tired? Hisashi asked his son as he began brushing the back of the child's head with his fingers. Still with his face buried in his dad's shirt, the child began shaking his head and answered with a groggy voice. No, I'm fully awake already. Hisashi then heard his son yawn, causing him to chuckle slightly. I ordered your usual cookies. Do you want them? Hisashi asked his son, To which Izuku nodded his head, still with his face buried in Hisashi's shirt, of course. With that confirmation, Hisashi finally set Izuku down to his own seat beside him before sliding over the plate full of cookies to the child's front. The cookies from this chain of cafes were fairly big, usually 3 inches in diameter. As a result, it took the slightly groggy child to eat even just one cookie. Hisashi then slid the cup of water for Izuku and reminded him to drink too. The child drank down almost half of the water on the cup before wiping his face with the back of his hand and reaching out for another cookie. This whole time Toshinori had just remained silent and seated, having no idea what to do when All for One's young son awakened. It was obvious that All for One's family has no idea of their patriarch's history, so Toshinori was conflicted on how he should behave with the little one awake and aware. Should he continue to approach aggressively like he has till now, or act in good faith for the sake of the child? Izuku, meanwhile, had mostly been nonchalantly nibbling at his second cookie up to now. He was still a little groggy, so he wasn't as aware of his surroundings as he would usually be. Not to mention, he was with his dad, so he wasn't really worried. But as he was about to take another small bite at his cookie, the little greenet seemed to freeze as his eyes widened. The small child's sleepy eyes slowly fully awakened and sparkled as they met with the bright blue eyes of the man sitting opposite him and his dad. The small child seemed to gasp in surprise, and in an excited whisper, he seemed to beam even more. "Almight?" Toshinori was surprised and taken aback by the child's reaction, and even slightly more by the fact that the child immediately recognized him. One would think a villain's child couldn't care less about heroes if they never knew of their parents' history with them, or would at least be conditioned to never care about them. But there was All for One's kid, acting like how Toshinori has seen most child fans react when they meet or recognize him, starstruck and beaming with excitement. Only then did Toshinori finally notice the child's shirt. It was a red, white, and blue shirt and had a stylized and attention-grabbing face of a famous pro-hero slapped in the middle of it. And who that famous pro-hero is, Toshinori definitely couldn't not recognize immediately. That pro-hero it was him. Toshinori was speechless. All for One's kid, this kid in front of him was beaming with utter excitement upon seeing him, and was even wearing a shirt of him. There was no doubt that All for One would never buy a shirt of him to give to his children. Toshinori knows very well that the villain hates him as much as he does him, after all. It's possible that his wife bought it for the child instead, and it's also possible that it's just pure coincidence that the kid was wearing that specific shirt the day he meets All for One again after nearly a decade. But considering the child's reaction, he could somehow sense that it's not just a coincidence. The child's intense excitement, and that shirt seemed to just be pointing at one answer. Toshinori slowly looked over to the child's father to ask telepathically, but even before he could actually ask, the expression on the man's face already managed to confirm Toshinori's suspicion. Hisashi was smiling warmly and gently, but Toshinori could tell that it was forced. Toshinori could read the irritation and weariness behind it. Then, finally, Toshinori decided to ask the question, "All for One, is your son, does he happen to be a fan of mine?" Hisashi's facade seemed to crack a little at the question, and a sense of annoyance and bitterness seemed to seep into the one-word answer he gave to the pro-hero. Chapter 3: Young Midoriya. Toshinori tried his best to act like nothing was happening. He was doing his very best to act natural as he walked just behind Hisashi as the villain or ex-villain was making his way to the opposite side of the mall to meet with his wife and their other son. Well, he acted as natural as possible, all while the small green-haired gremlin child of his arch-nemesis was smiling like a tiny maniac at him, all while being carried by his father. In any other situation, Toshinori would probably see this scenario as heartwarming. After all, it had always been his hope to bring light and inspire the younger generation, but this situation is different, and nothing like he'd ever hoped to believe. To think that this child in front of him wearing that almost manic smile is his child, it unnerves him. Toshinori internally groaned. He really doesn't want to think this way. He doesn't want to blame an innocent kid for something his father had done, and he certainly didn't want to intentionally project who his father is was onto the child. In fact, maybe it's just his imagination that's making the child's smile seem more unnerving than it actually is. He is still a child after all. Malice is just something that's not naturally ingrained into a child. But what were the chances of him being in this situation? What were the chances that All for One's child would come out to be a huge fanboy of his? Has any other hero ever been in this situation before? Has this ever happened before? Toshinori doesn't know. He was just really confused and conflicted. All the while, the tiny child noticed that his dad was holding him just a tiny bit tighter than usual during this whole walk, but Izuku didn't mind it, and even found it really nice. The small child just continued to smile like an idiot at his idol and hummed happily to himself as the walk continued. After a while, the two nemeses and the small child finally reached their destination, and before long, they should be able to meet with the rest of Hasashi's family once again. And for the first time since Toshinori had officially met the kid, Izuku finally broke eye contact, and without warning, he suddenly jumped off his father. Toshinori worried for a second until he noticed that the child seemed to float slowly in the air before safely landing on the ground and running away. Toshinori looked over to the child's father, who was already looking back at him with a subdued look of annoyance. Toshinori just furrowed his brows at the man's expression, before looking back at the child and following him with his eyes. Izuku, meanwhile, just happily ran past the multiple people in the mall, even let his arms drag behind him as he ran, like a ninja would. All the while, he listened. Listened for the specific voices he was looking for. "Another Almight t-shirt for Izuku, Mom? Don't you think he has enough already? Plus, Dad. It's fine. I'm sure your dad will be fine with it too. It's just one." As soon as Izuku heard his brother and mom's voices, his eyes seemed to shine a lot brighter, and without any warning at all, he suddenly jumped up, surprising all the people around him. Izuku floated gleefully for a few seconds in the air until he saw where his brother was, wearing a slightly deadpan expression as he looked at their mother. "If I didn't know better, I'd think Mom just likes messing with Dad," Tenko flatly told their mother, to which she pouted. "Don't think so low of your mother," Inko scolded her oldest. Izuku just chuckled to himself as he listened in on their conversation, before suddenly hawk diving towards his brother. "Mum! Tenku!" Izuku yelled for his mom and his brother's name as he flew down, surprising all the people that haven't noticed him until then. This also grabbed the attention of his mother and big brother. Tenko immediately looked up to the direction where his little brother's voice came from, exactly as Izuku dove onto him for a hug, and Tenko was able to catch him and spin him around with his whole body. Izuku laughed and giggled as he was spun around before getting pulled into a tight hug by his older brother. Tenko just chuckled as well. "Oh hey, Izuku. Did you sleep well?" he asked his younger brother. Izuku just flashed him a bright smile as he answered a bright, "Yup." Then Izuku immediately brought the topic to the exciting event he was meaning to tell his mother and brother. "And guess what, Tenko? Guess who me and Dad met in the mall? Come on. Guess. You too, Mom. Guess who me and Dad met? Guess. Izuku excitedly urged his family as he bounced up and down within his brother's embrace. Tenko and Inko just laughed at the youngest Midoriya's enthusiasm, and they decided to play along. Inko playfully hummed. "I wonder what can make my Izuku so excited like this. Maybe a hero meet and greet here at the mall? Could it have been Gang Orca? His agency is a little near here, no?" Izuku's smile got wider as his mom got it wrong and he energetically shook his head no. "Nope. Try again, Mom," Izuku told his mother. Then he turned his attention to his brother, and he asked him, "It's your turn to guess, Tenko. Tell me who you think me and Dad met here at the mall." Tenko playfully put on a serious face as he tried to look like he was thinking deeply, and he hummed. He would have reached for his chin while thinking, but both his hands were preoccupied with carrying his little brother. "I also think it could have been a hero, but if it's not a meet and greet, then maybe an off-duty hero that you happen to bump into. So a big hero whose jurisdiction is this area," Tenko deduced. Izuku's eyes sparkled as his brother's guess hits close, but he was also holding back his laughter because he knows that his brother was still wrong. Tenko noticed this, and he was able to tell which part of his guess was wrong, but he decided it would probably make his brother happier if he gets to reveal who the hero actually was. But I'm not sure which heroes patrol this area, so I can't really say, Tenko stated in playful defeat. Izuku couldn't hold his excitement back anymore, and he started bouncing up and down within his brother's embrace again. Okay. I'll tell you now. Finally, Izuku decided to reveal who the hero was. The hero that me and Dad met is no one other than. Exactly as his father and the mystery hero were finally walking up to the three of them. Inko and Tenko looked over to their patriarch with smiles on their faces, but those smiles were instantly replaced by wide eyes when they saw the expression the latter had, and they immediately recognized what it meant. Only then did the two of them notice the blue-eyed blonde man following beside their patriarch, and their jaws dropped. Then Izuku finally revealed who he and his father had met, though his mother and brother already put 2 and 2 together. The hero is All Might. Chapter 4, Midoriya Family. Inko and his eldest son's jaws dropped as they recognized the blue-eyed blonde standing beside their family's patriarch. And as if he was waiting for this timing, Izuku revealed who the big-shot hero he and his father had met. The hero is All Might, the youngest Midoriya revealed, full of glee. Then he finally noticed where his mother and brother were looking, and he turned around to find that his father and idol finally caught up to him. Dad! All Might! Izuku greeted with a bright smile, then he excitedly began introducing his family to the pro-hero. All Might! This is my mom and my brother, Tenko! Mom, Tenko, it's All Might! And he also introduced the pro-hero to his family, even though he knows they already know who he is. Dad bumped into him by chance earlier. They already knew each other before. Can you believe that? Dad never told me that. Izuku excitedly gushed to his mother and brother. The latter two, however, were still just dumbfounded as they looked back and forth between their patriarch and the blonde pro-hero, and as they tried to process what the youngest member of their family just said. Then finally, Tenko found some words to say, though he did stutter. Really? Tenko said in disbelief before pausing slightly. Dad? Our dad? Knew All Might himself personally? Tenko looked back at his younger brother, with some hope that the latter would start laughing out loud and refuting him, saying stuff like, "Are you kidding me, Tenko? Of course not. I'm just joking." Unfortunately for Tenko, Izuku continued with the absurd story that their father actually knew All Might, and his little brother just giggled. Yeah. Did you know that, Tenko? Tenko looked at his little brother in horror, then he looked over at their mother in hopes that she would have an answer to what the hell was happening, but she just gave her son a look as if saying, "Don't look at me. I have no idea either." Then in perfect sync, the two of them looked back at their patriarch who was wearing the sweetest and brightest and fakest smile one will ever see. You can almost see bright-colored flowers floating and falling around him. Inko and Tenko shuddered. Izuku just found their reactions hilarious, however, and with the help of his quirk, he jumped off of his brother and towards their father, who immediately caught him. "Mom, I think Dad's been replaced by a doppelganger," Tenko said in a flat tone to their mother. "I thought the same thing," Inko replied in the same tone. "Let's go look for your real father." Inko and Tenko both turned around in sync, but before they could take a step, they immediately turned back around and yelled at their patriarch in a panic. "Hisashi-kun, it's really you, right? You actually knew All Might? This is all real, right?" Inko first shouted. "Dad, this is a dream, right? No, maybe a prank? It's a prank. Please tell us this is a sick prank you thought of, please." Tenko immediately followed. There were almost tears in their eyes as they pleaded with their patriarch. "Believe me, I'm trying my best." Hisashi only had a single strained response to his strained smile, which only resulted in more disbelief in the matriarch and the eldest son. Izuku, meanwhile, just smiled and giggled more instead. During the whole scene, Toshinori had just been standing at the side and watching the Midoriya family All for One's family. This whole time, in the decade that All for One had disappeared, he had been spending it with his family, happily spending time with his family. Seeing just how close his family is to him, that they can joke around with him, bicker around with him, and in the case of the youngest child, laugh at him, it brought up mixed feelings in Toshinori. The thought that All for One had been happily with his family to this point, It frustrated him. The thought that All for One had managed to achieve peace and happiness through his family, it angered Toshinori. All for One had reigned in Japan for almost a century, even dragging the whole country down through a dark age all so he could rule it through the shadows and with an iron fist. He made life miserable for anyone unlucky enough to be born during his reign of terror, and even now as he has retired, the effects of his rule could still be felt after generations. So the idea that he has a family that truly loved him and truly cared for him, that he also loved for and cared for, after all that he has done to the world, it felt unfair. He turned so many children into orphans, and many spouses into widows and widowers, and yet here he was, spending all the time in the world with his wife and their sons. It's not fair. He shouldn't be having this. He doesn't deserve it. It's not fair. Almight-san? The gentle voice of a woman suddenly snapped Toshinori out of his thoughts, and he looked down in front of him to see who had called him. It was All for One's wife. Is it alright if I call you Almight-san? Or maybe Yagi-san? How should I be calling you? The green-haired woman politely asked Toshinori. I'm really sorry, this is just really weird. The green-haired woman nervously chuckled. This whole time you have just been a pro-hero my son idolized, but to think that you're an old friend of my husband, it's pretty surprising and confusing, so I apologize in advance if I'm being too awkward. And no, it's fine. Toshinori could only respond. And you can just call me Yagi, I guess. Then Yagi-san, it's very nice to meet you. My name is Midoriya. You already met Izuku, so I'll introduce my other son Tenko. Inko introduced herself before introducing her eldest son and gesturing to him. Toshinori looked over to All for One's eldest son, the son that looked the most like him, exactly as the latter bowed his body and properly introduced himself. My name is Tenko Midoriya, Yagi-san. Yoroshiku. This kid couldn't have been older than 15, Toshinori assumed. He had wavy light blue hair, which was nowhere near All for One's pure white hair, but that along with his crimson red eyes give him the same albino appearance as his father. He also has a mole below his lips just like. Nay, All Might! A little boy's bright voice coming from All for One's arms snapped Toshinori out of his thoughts again, and he looked over to the kid that called his name. What is it, boya? Toshinori referred to the little kid. He just realized this was the first time he talked directly to the child, and he unintentionally referred to him that way. Trance. Old-fashioned way of saying, little boy. Since Dad and us have been in America for a while, that means you haven't seen Dad in a long while, right? The small green-haired child giggled and asked him with an underlying tone of excitement. Why yes, that's right. Toshinori confirmed as he thought to himself, so All for One had been in America this whole time. All Might's answer immediately caused the little kid's smile to widen as he thought this was the perfect scenario for him. Well, in that case, why not visit us at our house so you can talk more with him? Wouldn't that be really cool? The little kid excitedly suggested, unintentionally also revealing his true intentions. Toshinori's eyes went wide and so did Hisashi's, but the both of them made sure to not make it obvious. You two can catch up with each other. And as a bonus, I can get to hear hero stories from you. Izuku told the pro-hero, not even able to hide his ulterior motive anymore. The three adults in the situation were dumbfounded by the 9-year-old child's straightforwardness. Toshinori and Hisashi's eyes were wide at the fact that they were being cornered into such a position by the latter's child, while Inko's hands had been covering her mouth in astonishment of her son's frankness. Tenko, meanwhile, had a face of half astonishment and half unsurprised as he was trying to look away. He could only think of one thing at the moment. That's my brother for all of you. Izuku! Inko said in a gentle scolding tone as she walked to her husband and took their youngest son from him. You shouldn't demand too much from All Might and your dad. I know you're excited to meet your idol, but you still need to behave. I'm really sorry, Yagi-san. Inko immediately apologized for her son. He gets really overexcited when it comes to you, so please excuse his directness. No worries, it's fine, Toshinori assured her. I've met many fans just like him, and he's just a kid, so I wasn't expecting him to not be excited. Inko just let another small sigh, before turning back towards her husband. Hisashi-kun, we're done with our shopping now. The boys and I will head over to the car first, okay? Meet us when you've caught up with Yagi-san. But Hisashi refuted the idea. I don't think Toshinori and I have much to catch up on for now, so I'll be going with you. Toshinori's attention perked up as soon as All for One spoke of leaving as well, but before he could say a single word, the latter continued. But as for my son's suggestion, I don't think it would be a bad idea. We really do have a lot to speak about, Toshinori, so if you'd like, then you can come visit me in our home and we can talk about anything you want to know, Hisashi suggested. And if it makes you more comfortable, you can bring your sidekick and your mentor as well. Hisashi then suddenly added, causing Toshinori to almost frown at him, but he managed to stop himself. Huh? Almight has a sidekick? Izuku unexpectedly reacted from his mother's arms. I never knew about that. Almight, can you please bring them with you too when you visit? Please? Izuku. Inko gently scolded Izuku again, but this time, she made sure that her son saw the deep disappointment on her face. Izuku immediately tensed up, and he sheepishly pouted as he wrapped his arms around his mom and hid his face in embarrassment. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, All Might. Inko just let out a sigh. As long as you understand now, then you're fine. Tenko meanwhile just patted his little brother's head to make him feel better. But now with Izuku seeming to not be willing to interrupt anymore, Hisashi looked back at Toshinori and asked the pro-hero. So, would you be okay with that arrangement? I am free anytime you wish to talk, so I'll just have someone send you our address. When you've made your decision, I'll answer any question you have. Hisashi told the pro-hero, then he finally said his farewell. It was a delight seeing you again after so long, Toshinori. But until your visit to our home, we'll have to part ways here. The matriarch and the family's eldest son both bowed to Toshinori as they bid their own farewells before the patriarch ushered them and they left. As the Midoriya family walked away, Toshinori watched as the youngest child looked at him with sad eyes as he waved goodbye. Toshinori weakly waved back at the small greenet, but when the family disappeared from his vision, a single question remained in his mind. Now what? Chapter 5, Little Menaces. It has been about 2 weeks since the Midoriya family met All Might in the mall by coincidence, and about a week since Toshinori set a date that he would be visiting the family's home. And now, together with his sidekick, Sir Naitai, and his mentor, Gran Torino, they were finally meeting the Underworld's overlord in his own home. Except, what the hell kind of house is this? Toshinori couldn't help but react as he stared up at the ginormous manor standing before him. From how All for One and his youngest son talked about their home, it gave the impression that it would be a simple abode, maybe a 5-bedroom house if it's All for One talking, but not a 100-bedroom freaking manor. This is a home fit for nobility. Toshinori's eyes and brows were practically twitching at the sight of the building, but the two men with him didn't seem too surprised. I had included images of this property on the files I handed over for you to read through, All Might. Did you not see any of them? Mirai Sasaki, All Might's sidekick, promptly let Toshinori know as he fixed the position of his glasses. Still, to think he actually spent this much of the fortune he's accumulated as a villain for a home for his family, I guess he does love them. Mirai noted. Well, either that, or this is the only home he feels is fit for him. TSK, Toshinori, Sorahiko began with a scolding tone in his voice. Did you at least read half of the compiled files Sasaki had given to you? Oh, of course, Sensei. I only skipped the section about All for One's home because I didn't think it would be important, but seeing this in front of us now. Toshinori's voice trailed off at the end, as his mind churned. He should have realized something was wrong the moment they arrived at the gates, and the first person that greeted them was the light blue-skinned chauffeur that was with All for One's family when they first met, with a car that was supposed to bring them to the home's entrance. Another flag should have been when they had to drive through a whole acre of trees. They had underestimated just how big of a fortune All for One really had. With just this as a basis, his family might even be part of the top 5%. Toshinori immediately shook his unimportant thoughts away and strengthened his resolve and focus. They will be meeting All for One in his own home, a sentence Toshinori never thought he'd say, and they'd have to be prepared for anything. They can't afford to be distracted. Is what he wanted to say, at least. Almight! The three heroes had heard a little boy's voice long before they even saw the boy himself, and as they looked up to the direction that the voice was coming from, they heard the unmistakable sound of window latches opening. When they looked up, they weren't expecting to see a small 9-year-old boy suddenly jumping off from a 6th-floor window and falling towards them, but not only that, they also weren't expecting to see pure white fabric wrapped around the aforementioned 9-year-old boy, as well as a dozen of the house's servants tangled and trapped in the same pure white sheets. The dozen servants were screaming for their dear lives as one by one, they were pulled along with the fabric and out of the window as well. Sorahiko and Almight prepared themselves for the rescue of the youngest Midoriya and the servants. But before they could act, the young Midoriya and the servants' fall was suddenly pulled to a stop. Izuku! Float back up, you stubborn little brother! We won't be able to hold on to everyone any longer. The three heroes heard a loud and frustrated yell from the 6th floor of the manor, and there they saw the eldest son of All for One and a number of other servants struggling to hold on tight to the fabric holding his little brother, and the rest of the trapped servants. The three heroes were dumbfounded by the situation, but even though they thought that they should probably continue on with the help and end the antics of the youngest Midoriya, something was compelling them to just stand by and watch till the end. Izuku! Float back up here now! Tenko yelled again when his little brother didn't respond at all and showed no signs of coming back up. The youngest Midoriya just giggled, however, and with a smug declaration, he yelled back, I finally mastered this quirk, Tenko! Don't worry! Just let go of everyone! No! Every single one of the trapped servants simultaneously yelled a variation of the word. Izuku just chuckled again, and confidently and triumphantly, he told them, Just watch me, everyone! The small child closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, his eyes revealed an almost emerald-like glow coming from them. At that moment, the fabric wrapping around him, and in addition, himself and the rest of the trapped servants began floating, as if all the weight or gravity affecting them became non-existent. The three heroes' eyes went wide as they watched what seemed to be mastery of a gravity manipulation quirk from a child at play in that moment. The other servants inside the manor were similarly wide-eyed at the scene. And that's not all, Tenko! The small child boasted again, exactly as he wore a huge grin and stretched his hands out. Everyone watching almost had their jaws drop to the ground as they watched both the fabric and the dozen servants spin around simultaneously to smoothly untangle and free everyone trapped in the fabric. Toshinori, Mirai, and Sorahiko's mouths were agape as they watched this 9-year-old child demonstrate a feat of complete quirk mastery that not even veteran heroes possess. If this child manifested his quirk when he was 4, then that would mean he managed to completely master his quirk in just 5 years. Even adults take decades to show great control of their quirk, let alone mastery. The kid in front of them is a quirk prodigy. Once every servant had been freed from the fabric, the youngest Midoriya untangled the fabric around himself as well, and slowly and one by one, he let their family servants down to the floor, with himself landing on the bottom of the steps of their home's entrance, and only a few feet away from the three visitors. He then proudly looked up and back to the 6th-floor window where his older brother was with a huge grin on his face. I've been practicing a lot, you know, Tenko. This is child's play for me now. Izuku proudly boasted to his older brother from the bottom of the steps, but instead of words of praise, he instead got scolded badly. You idiot! Stubborn little brother! Tenko angrily yelled down at his little brother. Even if you've been practicing, that didn't mean you can just drag innocent bystanders in your hijinks. Everyone was just doing their jobs, but you ended up disturbing them. Is that what a hero does? You stubborn little brother! Apologize to each and every one of them, Izuku! Izuku was biting down on the inside of his cheeks as his confidence from earlier shrunk down, and his eyes were beginning to shake and shine with tears. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, everyone. The youngest Midoriya squeaked out an apology as he looked to everyone he had given trouble to, and he realized the weight of what he had done. Tenko couldn't help but pinch the bridge of his nose as he let out a long sigh of frustration before turning around and walking away from the 6th-floor window. The heroes and some of the servants immediately felt bad for him. As the older brother, there was no doubt that he has to be responsible for his little brother's actions always when their parents are not around, and if this type of thing occurs regularly on his watch, then they could only imagine the amount of stress he has to deal with. They genuinely felt bad for him. But all that pity immediately disappeared not even a few seconds later when the teenage Midoriya suddenly jumped out of the same window his own brother had jumped from earlier. "Master Tenko!" All the servants collectively yelled in panic for their young master. Tenko heeded them no mind, however, and with the same fabric his younger brother was wrapped in earlier as support, he performed multiple aerial maneuvers to safely land on the ground in front of his little brother. The servants on the 6th floor who instinctively grabbed the fabric as soon as they saw their young master jump out of the window, and the servants on the ground who were preparing to somehow catch their master on the ground, all collectively let out a sigh of relief that he was fine. But still, they didn't appreciate experiencing 2 heart attacks in one day. The 3 heroes that watched all this go down meanwhile were just dumbfounded and speechless. He just jumped off 6 stories down without using a quirk and without any fear at all. The 3 heroes couldn't help but think simultaneously, "You're just as rash as your younger brother, boy. These are all for one's children? What the hell has he been feeding them?" They had also thought. Tenko kneeled in front of his little brother and patted his head a few times to make him feel better, then he gently scolded his little brother but still remained stern. "I know you were just excited, Izuku, both to see All Might again and to show everyone you mastered your quirk, but still, people could have gotten hurt. Heroes are supposed to save people and prevent them from getting hurt, not be the reason they're hurt. Imagine what could have happened if everyone else and I weren't here to stop everyone from falling, and you weren't able to use your quirk on time. So many people would have been hurt, even you." The small greenet looked down in shame as his eyes continued to water, and he apologized again. "I'm really sorry, Tenko. I didn't think about any of that." Tenko let out a gentle smile as his little brother took his words to heart. He gave his little brother one last pat on his head before pulling him closer to him and carrying him in his arms as he stood up. With that out of the way, he quietly cleared his throat and properly faced his dad's 3 guests. "Hello, everyone. Yagi-sen has already met me before, but I'll introduce myself again for our 2 other guests." All for One's eldest son elegantly and gracefully spoke a preamble. "My name is Tenko Midoriya. I'm the eldest son of our family, and this one is my little brother, Izuku. Since we're the ones here, we'll be the ones to accompany you to meet Dad. He's currently in his study, awaiting your arrival. You will also be having your discussions and conversations there." Tenko promptly let their guests know, which made Izuku perk up for a quick moment before immediately turning despondent. "I apologize for my brother, as well as the rest of our servants' unkempt appearance at the moment. I still hope you find our home to be hospitable enough." Tenko finished his introduction speech to their guests. Toshinori, Mirai, and Sorahiko were just speechless after listening to the sophisticated speech of the teenager. It was like a complete switch from the rash and strict boy they saw earlier. This is all for one's oldest son? What has that man been feeding his kid? The 3 heroes couldn't help but rephrase the question they had thought earlier. Their attention were then swiftly taken away from the eldest son as they noticed that the servants on the ground had ran over to their posts on the steps of the manor's entrance and held perfect 45-degree bows. "We welcome you to the Midoriya household, esteemed guests." The servants greeted the heroes in perfect sync. "Each one of you as servants are at your service." The last greeting from the servants was the final nail in the coffin in constructing the image of All for One's home in Toshinori's mind, and he was just left in silent astonishment at the situation he found him, his sidekick, and his mentor in. It's like we're visiting the royal castle of a small country. Chapter 6, Sad Little Puppy. "So, how did all that happen?" Tenko couldn't help but slump his body slightly as he was greeted with a question he knew was coming. He has accompanied All Might and their 2 other guests to his father's study as he was expected to do, but he knew that he wasn't going to be easily excused after the shenanigan his little brother pulled. As for where that little brother is? Well, naturally, as soon as they entered their dad's study, he used his quirk to bounce from Tenko's arms to their dad's, trying to act like he did nothing. But now, he was sheepishly burying his face on their dad's shirt, trying to hide his face and embarrassment. Tenko just let out a long sigh. Izuku heard Yagi-san and the other guests arrive and got too excited, and he immediately ran towards the entrance to greet them. Unfortunately, he ended up getting tangled in a few of the curtains that the servants were replacing the old ones with, and those curtains then got tangled with even more curtains, and everyone that were unlucky enough to be caught in the middle got trapped in them as Izuku continued to run to the south entrance. Tenko explained. Hisashi couldn't help but let out one long sigh as well. "I'm sorry, Dad, Tenko." A small squeak came from the child in Hisashi's arms. "I promise not to do it again. If you understand that what you did was wrong and reckless, then it's alright. Just make sure you personally apologize to each of the servants, okay?" Hisashi told his youngest son as he slightly messed his green hair with his free hand. "Still," Tenko suddenly piped up, "I don't know if I should be glad Izuku jumped off the 6th floor window and didn't went straight down the stairs, because I can only imagine how many more people would have been trapped in his curtain hurricane if he did." He added as a remark, and also maybe as a slight tease to his little brother, which successfully made his brother flinch and look back at him with teary eyes. "Tenko, stop teasing your brother. He already feels sorry enough." Hisashi scolded his eldest, but Tenko just shrugged. "I'll have Akira-san and Adohira-san check on all the servants that were entangled in the incident, then I'll hand over the report of any injuries," Tenko informed their father, but Izuku was able to pick up on his brother's emphasis on the word entangled, and he glared at his older brother, as even more tears formed in his eyes. "Tenko!" Hisashi sternly rebuked his eldest son again. Okay, Tenko chuckled in defeat. "I'll stop now. Come, Izuku," Tenko told his little brother as he reached out his hand. "We still have to continue our lessons, and Dad has to talk with Yagi-san." As his brother said that, Izuku put on a pout as he half buried his face on their dad's shirt again. Do I really have to go? Can't I just stay here and listen to Almight's stories?" "No, Izuku." Their dad was the one to sternly deny his request. "I'll be talking about serious topics with Almight and his sidekick and mentor. We can't have you with us while we're having our conversation. And no eavesdropping either. You still need to finish your lessons for the day too, Izuku." "Oh, okay," Izuku sadly responded before finally letting go of his dad's shirt and jumping off from his father's arms. The youngest Midoriya almost dragged his steps as he walked towards his older brother. Tenko smiled at his little brother to comfort him, and even gestured with his arms that he was going to carry him on their way back. Izuku took one look at his brother's hands, however, and with a dramatic pout and turn of his head, he scoffed at the idea of being carried by his brother after he teased him multiple times. Though it didn't seem like he was too angry, since the youngest Midoriya still took his brother's hand and was okay with walking back alongside his brother. Tenko just chuckled and smiled at his little brother, and slightly messed the latter's green hair. "We're going back to our lessons now, Dad. Hope you have a good time catching up with Yagi-san." Tenko wished his father good luck as he and his little brother took their leave. Toshinori, Mirai, and Sorahiko, the 3 hero guests in All for One's home, stood boredly outside the former villain's study while the latter's sons went in first to discuss what had happened earlier with their father. All for One's room seemed to be properly soundproof considering they're not hearing even a single peep from inside the room. Maybe that's why the former villain chose to have their talk there. But it does make them curious about something. What is All for One's reaction to his son's hijinks? Is he mad? Was he disappointed? Is he praising them right now? Toshinori had mentioned that his family looked incredibly close to All for One, and they didn't seem like a family that might be hiding a dark secret like abuse, neglect, or an unequal power balance. In fact, there seemed to be equal respect and authority between All for One and his wife, and their sons seemed to be both very open to the both of them. The mystery of All for One's reaction was scratching at them, but it's not like they can just sneak a peek and find out. Toshinori couldn't help but just let out a short sigh. Mirai noticed this and knew something was bothering his idol, so for the sake of distracting the 3 of them, he brought up a topic that they had probably all thought of already. "That green-haired boy Izuku, right? What do you 2 think about the quirk mastery he showed earlier?" The one to speak up was Sorahiko. "For a 9-year-old, it's incredibly impressive. In order for a pro hero with a similar quirk to reach the same level of control and mastery as that kid, they would have to keep training their quirk nonstop for at least 10 years. But he managed to do it in half of that time as a kid. And despite what the kid that looks more like their father said, I have no doubt that if the kid wanted, he would have been able to stop everyone falling in mid-air with just one quick thought. If we're being generous, he could probably have done it on instinct, because that kid is a prodigy, Sorahiko confidently stated. The kid that looks more like All for One, huh? His name is Tenko, right? Mirai reminded himself of the teenage Midoriya's name. He seems very mature for his age. He even performed that flawless introduction and welcome for us, all with the grace and sophistication often expected in adults, Mirai noted. He also seemed to have been the one to lead the rest of the servants on the 6th floor to rescue the servants that were caught in the little kid's hijinks. If that really was the case, then he has the makings of a natural leader minus the impulsiveness he seems to share with his brother. They're the result of having All for One as their father, huh? Toshinori loudly pondered, though whether he thought this out of amazement or frustration, Mirai nor Sorahiko couldn't tell. Well, let's not give all the credit to All for One. His wife equally had something to do with how they grew up, Sorahiko jokingly stated before chuckling slightly, trying to lift up the tension in the air. Still, All for One's wife. I wonder what he saw in her or what she did to make All for One decide to throw everything away and spend his life with her and their sons. If All for One really is telling the truth about giving up on ruling Japan once again for his family, then I guess we'd have her to thank. Sorahiko joked around more. Too bad she had work today, then maybe we'd have gotten the chance to meet her, Mirai added. As Mirai mentioned the wife's work, Toshinori immediately remembered something from the files his sidekick had compiled. That's right, she's the breadwinner of the family, and All for One is a stay-at-home dad. As Toshinori thought that, the door to All for One's study finally opened, and out came the former villain's sons. Yagi-san, Sasaki-san, Torino-san. Tenko referred to the 3 heroes in front of him with the same grace and elegance he has showed them thus far. You can come in now, and my brother and I will be excusing ourselves. The 3 heroes just gave him slight nods as a response, but as they did, they managed to take notice of the small greenet quietly standing beside the teenager with an expression on his face that would make anyone practically coo all over him. The green-haired kid looked like a sad little puppy as he looked at both Almight and Sir Night-Eye. His bright green irises seemed to sparkle as tears were slowly forming in his eyes, and his frown he was desperately trying to hide by upturning the corners of his lips. It would have been enough to melt anyone's hearts. He couldn't have inherited this face from All for One. It's definitely from his mother's side. No doubt about it. Toshinori, Mirai, and Sorahiko all thought as they tried to hide their true expressions. Come on, Izuku. Say bye-bye to them for now. Tenko urged his little brother to be polite. I'll see you again later, All Might, Sir Night-Eye, Grand Torino. The little kid hesitantly squeaked out as he gave them a 45 degrees bow. Tenko gave the heroes a 45 degrees bow as well, and he ushered himself and his little brother back to where they should be. But this didn't stop Izuku from sheepishly looking back at the heroes with a sad look in his eyes as they walked away. He seems to really be a big fan of yours, Toshinori. Sorahiko jokingly teased his pupil. He's really sad he won't get to spend more time with you. Maybe we should meet up with him after we talk with All for One to cheer him up, Mirai then sarcastically added. Toshinori's mentor and sidekick were genuinely only joking around when they told him that, but they were surprised when Toshinori agreed to their suggestion. Let's do that. Chapter 7, Devil's Truce. Are you sure you'll be okay, Hisashi-kun? I really can take the day off. I don't want to come home to the house missing a whole wing. Inko's words to Hisashi echoed in his mind as the door opened again and in came Toshinori, his sidekick Mirai Sasaki, and his mentor Sorahiko Torino. It didn't come as a surprise to Hisashi that Inko would be worried over heroes visiting their home, because even though he tried his best to hide his true feelings towards heroes and especially All Might his wife, and later on, their kids too, still managed to see through him. As Hisashi thought about his wife, he subconsciously ended up placing his attention on the old man in the heroes group. Sorahiko immediately noticed this, and in a disgruntled and annoyed tone, he asked the villain. What? Something on my face? Hisashi put on a neutral smile and replied. No. I just thought that it has been a while, Sorahiko. How long has it been? 20? 30 years? Sorahiko grimaced as he hissed. Aren't you so smug for someone who's begging us not to arrest him right now? That's what this whole thing is about, isn't it? Pleading with our humanity so we take pity on your little family and let them keep you. Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, all for one, but all pity goes out the window for you. So if you want to keep negotiating your freedom, I'd suggest getting rid of that smug look on your face first. Sorahiko had practically spat on Hisashi's offer to be civil, but it wasn't as if he wasn't expecting this. Hisashi kept the smile on his face as he informed the old hero. Even if you say that, the truth is, you can't really perform an arrest here, correct? It's not as if I've outright confirmed on record that I'm all for one, and you have no definitive evidence connecting me to that villain. Hisashi taunted the heroes. As I present myself in front of you right now, I'm simply Hisashi Midoriya, the stay-at-home father of the Midoriya family and the husband of a cafe corporation CEO, Inko Midoriya. But of course, you three already know that, with the amount of digging you did on me and my family to find something to implicate me. Hisashi confidently grinned at the three heroes. Oh, and before I forget, I rendered your wiretaps useless the moment you stepped foot in my home's entrance. Did you really think I'd let a single word out from this room? I'm not that naive to think so, but to think you actually were. Hisashi sneered, earning him glares from the three heroes. But with all that out of the way, let's get on to my real intent in inviting you to my home. Please take your seats. Hisashi aimed to change the subject as he gestured the heroes to take their seats on the long sofas sitting perpendicular to his table. Toshinori and Sorahiko glared daggers at Hisashi, though Mirai went ahead and took a seat. The former two soon joined him as well. First, to clear up the misunderstanding, Hisashi began. I called you here not to negotiate for my freedom. I know very well that there's nothing I can do to quell your urge to lock me up in Tartarus. Hisashi's last sentence couldn't help but bring out a scoff from Sorahiko, but then he continued. Instead, I'm here to negotiate a truce. Toshinori and Sorahiko's eyes both went wide. As I have in the past decade, I'll continue to be inactive in the Underworld. I won't even take up the moniker All for One. I'll also be in your surveillance, and you'll be given access to my home whenever you deem necessary to check on me. Hisashi began listing out his offers. If any issue regarding villains arise for heroes that need a second opinion, I'd gladly offer a consultation. If you need a favor that concerns the deep depths of the Underworld, I'd gladly give it to you. If you require someone with connections with any sector at all, pharmaceuticals, engineering, manufacturing, all you have to do is ask. He had also added, painting shock and surprise in the three heroes who couldn't believe what was being brought to them on a silver platter. All that I want in return is that I'm not taken away from my family, and for you to keep quiet about my past to them, Hisashi declared to the heroes. But why? Sorahiko asked as he looked at the villain with a mixed look of anger, confusion, and shock. The villain didn't even hesitate to answer his question. As much as this might sound hard to believe, they really are what's most important to me now. My old desire to rule Japan is no more. I've gladly thrown it away because it meant I could be with Inko, Tenko, and Izuku. They're all that I care about now. Is that why you and your family lived in America for the past decade? Mirai brought up the question. Did you bring them there so you can start a new life with them? Yes, Hisashi answered. We decided when we learned that Inko was pregnant with our youngest son that we would live in America. At the same time, I would cease all activities as All for One so I can fully focus on being a father and husband. So why move back now? Toshinori was the one to ask the question. A few reasons. One was that Inko's company had decided to move their headquarters here in Japan, where she had originally started her business. Tenko, too, had wished to reconnect with his Japanese roots. And Izuku, Hisashi's voice seemed to trail off as he was about to mention why Izuku would want to move here to Japan. Well, I believe you already have an idea why Izuku would want to move here, don't you? Hisashi asked Toshinori directly with a strained smile. That's right. Toshinori confirmed with a strong conviction, causing a tense atmosphere between the arch-nemeses to suddenly appear as they talked about the small greenet, like it was a competition. Ahem. A brave soul cleared their throat to break the tension. Since we're on the topic of your sons, I have a few questions about them. Mirai was the brave soul. What about them? Hisashi was genuinely curious about the hero's sidekick's questions. Your youngest son, Izuku. Mirai first brought up the small greenet. His government record stated that his quirk hasn't been confirmed yet, but from what we saw earlier, it seems like there's no doubt that it's a gravity manipulation quirk. Your wife is registered as having a similar manipulation quirk, which makes Izuku's quirk a derivative of her quirk, so why haven't you registered his quirk to the government yet? What's making you unsure about his quirk? Hisashi remained silent for a while, then he responded. Truth be told, I was waiting to see if he ended up inheriting my quirk as well. It was the same with Tenko. I also waited to see if he'd inherited All for One too. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you wish to look at it, it wasn't the case for either of them. Your eldest too? Isn't Tenko's quirk in every government record of his redacted? If he didn't inherit your quirk, then why redact it? Mirai also brought up the other son. Tenko's quirk, due to the nature of his quirk, we decided it would be for the better if it wasn't on public record at all. His quirk is a mutation, a quirk that doesn't resemble his mother's or my quirk, and can be destructive. We didn't want him to be discriminated against all because of his quirks, so we had it redacted instead. Hisashi told them the truth. If you wish to see the details of his quirk, I'll be more than happy to let you see the unredacted records, Hisashi offered. Though if you want to see Tenko's quirk in action, I'm afraid it would have to be up to him. The three heroes seemed relieved to hear the villain deny their worst fear, though they're still careful to take his words with a grain of salt. As expected, the thought of two other people potentially owning Hisashi's quirk scared them. They've already had a difficult time trying to defeat a single All for One, but if one or two more of him to appear, they would have lost all hope. After clearing up the hero's misconception about his son's quirk, Hisashi decided it would be a good time for the conversation to move on. If that's all you have to ask about my sons, then we can move on to your other questions. Izuku, what are you doing? The greenet's older brother suddenly asked him, making him turn his rolling chair to face him, revealing bright white and sparkling orchids in the small child's hands. I'm making apology flowers for everyone I bothered earlier, the greenet sheepishly admitted. I read in an article before that white orchids are good apology flowers, so I thought I'd make orchids since silkweave can only make white threads, Izuku told his brother, as he resumed weaving the individual petals of the flower. Silkweave? Is that the name you gave that thread quirk? Wait, didn't you just get that quirk 6 months ago? You're already getting really good at it. Tenko praised his little brother, as he watched him carefully recreate the delicate look of the flower. Not really, Izuku denied with a pout. I haven't been practicing with this quirk a lot, so I still have to do each flower really slowly or the orchids will end up looking ugly. I also need to make 30 flowers. The little greenet sounded despondent that he wasn't going at a faster pace, but Tenko couldn't be even prouder of his little brother. Having to juggle training multiple quirks, with more quirks seeming to pop up every month, Tenko was brimming with pride at how talented his little brother was, and he doubted that there was any other 9-year-old in the world able to do what Izuku was doing. You're working really hard to prove how sorry you are to everyone. I think as long as your orchids look good enough, they'd know how sincere you are, Izuku. Tenko cheered his little brother up before walking over to his little brother's desk to grab the test sheets he answered earlier. He looked over at his little brother's answers and smiled to himself as he found all of them correct as usual. And as usual, it had a few doodles on the empty spaces of Izuku as a hero, but some things were a little different today. It had All Might in them like always, but his little brother had also drawn All Might's sidekick and mentor, and it looked like he was actually in a team-up with them. Tenko just chuckled to himself, and he went back to his own desk to properly mark Izuku's answers. Chapter 8. I'm gonna be a hero. After a few hours of their discussion with the former overlord, Toshinori, Mirai, and Sorahiko felt that they were satisfied to where their had conversation headed to. Most notably, how their surveillance of Hisashi would go. It was decided that Mirai would be the one to monitor the villain full-time. He will be setting up base in the family's manor, and would be given his own office next to Hisashi's study so he could still fulfill his job as All Might's sidekick even from the Midoriya household. Toshinori and Sorahiko would also pay visit at random times as well in between their hero duties, but most of the surveillance responsibility was to be left to Mirai. And if Mirai ever feels like Hisashi was up to something, he was free to use his quirk on the former villain, or anyone at all in the manor, granted that they felt comfortable about Mirai doing so. As for the excuse for Mirai moving into the home that they would be telling the matriarch and their sons, Hisashi had suggested the idea of Mirai getting kicked out of his old apartment, and Toshinori being the one to ask him to let Mirai live there. It was reasonable enough to believe, and knowing his wife well, Hisashi knew Inko wouldn't say no to a situation like it. With all parties agreeing to it, it was decided that Mirai would begin moving in the next day, after Hisashi has informed his family and had the sidekick's room and office set up, which meant the green-haired sidekick would have to rush packing his belongings in only a few hours. Right now, the three heroes were being escorted by Adohira, the family's light blue-skinned chauffeur, to the household's dining room for dinner. The heroes had initially declined the former villain's offer to pay back the trouble of coming over, but he was somehow able to make them agree. Though their main reason for agreeing was their curiosity about what kind of food they would be served, considering how lavish everything else in the Midoriya house has been. But as the three heroes and the chauffeur continued to walk through the manor's main hallway, they managed to come upon the household's youngest lord with a small bouquet of sparkling orchids in his small hands. He was talking to two maids who were each carrying a bin of velvet sheets. "I'm really sorry about earlier, Aoi Nizan, Millie Nizan. I should have thought more about my actions. I'm really sorry for troubling you." The small greenet apologized as he gave a full 90 degrees bow. Young Master Izuku, it's really nothing," one of the young maids cheerfully told the young child. "Now that it's over, it was actually really fun. Kinda like riding a roller coaster, you know?" It was fun getting to see the young master demonstrating his quirk on us, especially since we only ever see you using your quirk from afar," the other maid added. "So there's no need to apologize, young master. Please don't bow to us." Still," Izuku insisted with an embarrassed look on his face as he straightened his posture and looked back up at the maids. At least do you accept my apology and my apology flower?" Apology flower?" the two maids asked in sync. "Why, yes. I read that orchids symbolize sincerity and are good as apology flowers, so I made some fabric orchid flowers," Izuku sheepishly answered. "Oh, is that what those are?" One maid sounded genuinely surprised. "We've been seeing those flowers with a bunch of people since earlier, and we thought they were really pretty. So the young master made them yourself?" Izuku hummed his answer. "Oh, in that case, then we'll accept it with all our hearts," the first maid, Aoi, happily told her young master. "Yes, you can place them on the top of the bins we're holding, young master," the second maid, Millie, concurred. Izuku's eyes sparkled in joy, and with a smile on his face, he happily gave a suggestion. "I have a better idea." Izuku's eyes gave off the same emerald glow as they did earlier, and the small greenet began to float and reach the two maids' eye level. The two girls were confused, but they stood still and left it up to their young master. The greenet then floated closer to the two maids, and on each of them, he gently placed an orchid in their ears as he pushed their hair back. "There. They should stay tucked in place until you two are done for the day." Izuku smiled proudly at the two maids as he floated back to the ground. "I hope you like them." With wide eyes, the two maids slowly looked at each other and at the orchids placed in each other's hair, and they couldn't help but blush at their young master's gesture. They really are pretty, young Master Izuku," Aoi practically squeaked out in a fluster while Millie just nodded her head in agreement. "We'll surely treasure them forever." We're gonna go back to our jobs now," Millie said in a fluster as well. "We'll see you around, young master." After that, the two young maids ran off, leaving Izuku feeling happy that they liked his gift and unaware of the effect his little gesture had on them. Izuku then looked down at the orchids in his hands and counted them, 4 more. With a smile on his face, the small greenet was about to take a step to look for the 4 remaining people he still had to apologize to, when he met face to face with the 3 heroes he had been wishing to see again since that morning. A huge look of awe immediately painted the little boy's face, and his eyes seemed to sparkle so brightly as they saw his father's guests, and he immediately began jumping up and down in excitement. Almight! Sir Night Eye! Grand Torino! Hello again! The small greenet greeted the 3 heroes as he gave them a 95 degrees bow. It's you, kid! Sorahiko greeted him. Izuku, right? Izuku immediately straightened his posture. Why, yes. My name is Izuku. Nice to see you again, Grand Torino. The small greenet couldn't even hold back his smile as he was being addressed by his idol's own mentor. Seeing this whole thing in front of them, Sorahiko and Mirai immediately felt the awkwardness and confusion Toshinori had felt the first time he met this little kid. To think that this green-haired hero fanboy is actually all for one's son, it was a complete reversal. And then, good to see you again too, kid. You were really good with your quirk earlier. Sorahiko could only say, only because he didn't know what else to say to the greenet. Izuku's eyes seemed to sparkle even more as he was praised by the veteran hero. Thank you very much, Grand Torino. I've been working really hard. Despite the greenet's enthusiasm, a slight awkward silence still followed between the heroes and the small kid, as the heroes couldn't think of anything else to say to the former villain's child. And they couldn't help but feel bad for letting down the kid in front of them. Finally, AleahLRB spoke up, breaking the silence. Young Master Izuku, Master's guests are currently heading to the dining room, so we'll have to excuse ourselves for now. You still have something else to do, correct? Izuku exclaimed. Yes. I have 4 more people to apologize to. It was really nice to see you again. Izuku once again gave a 90 degrees bow to the heroes. I hope I see you again around. Izuku then straightened his posture and was about to run to the other direction from AleahLRB and the heroes when Toshinori suddenly spoke up. Izuku's eyes went wide as they sparkled from what he heard, though AleahLRB's eyes squinted slightly. Are you sure about that, Almight? I assure you, this household is every bit of a maze for anyone who doesn't live here. Will you be able to find your way to the dining room afterwards? Yes. I'll be fine. Toshinori practically guaranteed his return. And if I end up getting lost, I'll still have young Izuku here to accompany me. Isn't that right, Boya? Toshinori looked over to the young greenet, causing him to immediately tense up, but still he looked back at his family's chauffeur and aggressively shook his head yes. I've memorized each and every room in the house, and I know the fastest way to every single one of them. I will definitely bring All Might to the dining room really quickly. Izuku assured the chauffeur as a plea to let his idol stay with him. AleahLRB furrowed his brows at his young master, something that none of the other servants would even dare think, let alone do, before finally relenting. Very well, young master. Torino-san, Sasaki-san, let us continue heading over to the dining room. Right this way. The chauffeur told the remaining heroes as he ushered them. Good luck, Sorahiko and Mirai only wished to Toshinori in their minds as they walked away. Once the 2 heroes and the chauffeur rounded a corner and disappeared from their vision, Toshinori and Izuku began to walk, and the pro hero finally talked to the little boy. So what do you have there, Boya? I called him Boya again. Toshinori just realized. Izuku tensed up as he looked up at his idol. They're fabric orchids, All Might. I made them as gifts to everyone I ended up bothering earlier. Why you made them? Toshinori sounded genuinely surprised. Did you just make them today? While we were talking to your father? The little greenet hummed yes, but then he became despondent as he pouted. But I had to rush them so they're not as perfect as they should be for apology flowers. Everyone seems to really like them, but I think that they're not as good because I haven't been practicing. What are you talking about, Boya? They look amazing. You said you made them for everyone that got caught in the incident earlier, right? If you include everyone that was also on the 6th floor, that would mean you'd have to make at least 25 flowers. You made 25 of that within a few hours? That's impressive, Boya. Boya stuck. Toshinori realized. Izuku's green irises sparkled as he was praised by his idol, and he spoke without thinking. T30, actually, Almight. That's even more amazing! Toshinori couldn't hold in his surprise. Izuku just looked up at his idol as his mouth was agape, and without realizing it, his eyes had started to tear up, causing the pro-hero to suddenly panic. B-boya! Why are you crying all of a sudden? Was it something I said? Please don't cry! Toshinori kneeled in front of the small child as he tried his best to calm the now tearing child down, but at that moment, Toshinori suddenly felt cold slither up his spine as he felt multiple glares head his way, the most notable one coming from a location where they shouldn't even be visible. Why, young Izuku, please don't cry, alright? I'm really sorry. Toshinori apologized to the small greenet as a last resort, but Izuku just looked at him confused. Why are you apologizing, Almight? I'm really happy, you know. Izuku told the pro-hero with a huge smile on his face. Hearing you praising me, getting to meet you in person, and having you in our house, it made me really happy. It's more than I've ever wished for. The small greenet cheerfully told his idol as he began wiping his tears away with the back of his hands. I've been a really big fan since I can remember. What the little boy said made Toshinori take pause, and he immediately remembered all the things he thought about the little boy when they had first met. Toshinori was afraid of the little boy, he was disturbed and unnerved by him, he even thought of horrible things about him, all because he was All For One's son, when this whole time, the little boy was excited and practically jumping over the moon to get to meet Toshinori. The little boy in front of him is a pure and bright soul, but all Toshinori saw was the shadow that gave fruit to him, and if he had continued to think and see him that way, then he would have inevitably become the person to snuff out that brightness. Toshinori was truly sorry to the small child. Boya. Toshinori referred to the small child again. Earlier, your brother was talking about all the things a hero should and shouldn't be or do. Does that mean that you're planning to become a hero someday? Izuku's eyes immediately lit up with excitement, and he confirmed Toshinori's suspicion. Yes. Yes. I want to become a hero. I want to be a hero just like you, All Might. I want to be a pillar of peace. A light to everyone. It's my dream. The small greenet continued. I'm going to enroll to UA High, and I'm going to be a hero as great as you. Toshinori's eyes went wide as he listened to the little boy's declaration, and as he was filled with a mixture of emotions for the little boy. He was proud for the little boy, that despite being All For One's son, he was still resolute in becoming a hero, and he was genuinely excited to watch him grow and see the type of person he will be. But at the same time, he was afraid for the little boy. What if he learns that he's the son of a villain? And not just any villain, but All For One, the one who plunged Japan into an era of darkness at the dawn of quirks? How would he take that? There's no doubt that it would deeply affect him and his dream. And what if the rest of the world learns of his lineage? What if the world decides, just like did when he first met Izuku, that he is just as bad as his father? That he's destined to be a villain just for being All For One's son? What if the world decides to discard Izuku and snuff out the light in his eyes? No. No. Toshinori would never let that happen. Not on his watch. Toshinori scooped up the greenet's tiny hands with his own, surprising the little boy. Young Izuku. Toshinori referred to the little boy, and in a solemn tone, he made an oath. I promise that I will see to it that you become a hero. I will watch you grow into the hero you are destined to be. You will become a hero fitting of the title, the next symbol of peace, and you won't just be a hero as great as me, you will be even greater. I give you my word. Toshinori vowed to the little boy. He will nurture the hero hopeful in front of him, and he will protect him from anybody who would dare hurt him. And as long as he's alive, he won't let Izuku or the world know about his father's true identity. Chapter 9. Keeping Lies Secret. Once the three heroes' visit has ended and they have left, Inko finally came home from her work. She was disappointed that she missed his husband's guests by a hair, but at the end of the day, she's just glad their home was still intact. As they were waiting for dinner to be prepared, Hisashi caught his wife up on what they had discussed or what they were supposed to have discussed, and he informed her of Mirai's predicament, though he ended up changing a few details the last minute. Instead of getting kicked out of his apartment, Hisashi informed Inko that Mirai's lease on his apartment was ending, and that he didn't bother renewing it since he had been planning on buying his own home. He was supposed to move into his new home this week, but there had been complications with the new house, and in the end, the deal fell through. With his old landlord having already found new renters for his apartment, and no new home to move into, Mirai has been staying at a hotel for a few days while he looks for a new place to live. After hearing about this little dilemma, Hisashi offered to let Mirai stay in their home for a little while as they had enough room to spare, and he told Toshinori and Mirai that if Inko agreed to it then he can move in. As Hisashi had expected, Inko immediately said yes, and even without him alluding to it, she even said that Mirai would be more than welcome to move in the next day. Hooray for Mirai! During dinner, they had also informed their sons about the arrangement, to which Izuku couldn't help be excited about, and he ended up bouncing endlessly on his chair after hearing the news. Tenko brought up the same worries his mother also had beforehand, that being the physical state of their home, if their father was to be in the vicinity of a hero. But Inko assured Tenko that their patriarch has already proved that day that he can handle a few heroes in their home. Hisashi felt like multiple jabs to his pride were both intentionally and unintentionally thrown his way that dinner, but he decided to think nothing of it, and before long, dinner ended. The members of the family went to their respective rooms as the servants began cleaning up, with Izuku being sent to his room so he could be given a bath. Izuku had just finished changing into fresh clothes and was being pampered by Aoi and Millie, the two maids assigned to him that night. He was on his study table doodling and taking notes on his quirk analysis notebook when they received a knock on the door. Izuku's imaginary puppy ears practically perked up as he looked over to the door, and his imaginary tail had started wagging. "I'll go get it." Aoi was the one to go and open the door, and she was surprised to see who it was. "Master!" Hisashi looked into the room as looked for his son, and he asked the maid, "Did Izuku finish taking a bath?" "Yes, sir. He's on his study table right now working on his notebook," Aoi reported to her boss, when Izuku himself cheerfully exclaimed from his chair on the other side of the room, "Dad!" Izuku was standing on his rolling chair as he gladly waved at his father, and he wagged his imaginary tail. Millie, meanwhile, was trying her best to beg their young master to sit down before he fell from the chair. Hisashi smiled at his son and weakly waved back before looking over to the two maids and asking them, "Can you two leave for a moment? I need to talk with my son about something." There was a serious undertone in the household's patriarch that both the maids and Izuku understood. Aoi and Millie didn't even hesitate, and with a bow, the two maids responded in sync. "Then, please excuse us, master." The two maids then left, leaving Hisashi and Izuku alone. The small greenet got off his chair, and as he walked towards his father, he asked, "Dad, what is it?" Hisashi looked at his son with a solemn expression before scooping him up in his arms and carrying the small child as he sat down on the greenet's bed. "Izuku," Hisashi began with a somber tone, "since Sir Knight I will be staying with us starting tomorrow, I wanted to talk to you about your quirk. Do you remember what I told you before?" Izuku slowly nodded his head. That I would need to choose which quirk to show other people, and that I would have to hide my other quirks when the time comes. "That's right. Unfortunately, that time will be tomorrow," Hisashi told his son. "And I know I told you that you would be able to choose, but since Sir Knight I, Almight, and Grand Torino have already seen you using your gravity manipulation quirk, you will have to keep using it from now on as your official quirk. You can still train and use your other quirks, and any other quirks that you'll get, but you'll have to do it in secret, even in our home." Izuku's eyes slowly widened and he tightly grasped his father's shirt, as he buried half of his face in his father's torso. Hisashi could only slowly caress his son's hair to comfort and support him. Izuku's quirk is an incredibly rare one. It is a quirk that lets Izuku manifest multiple quirks over his lifetime, which is why he has his gravity manipulation quirk, his silkweave, and eavesdropping quirk, and many more. Gift is what they call his quirk, the quirk to have many quirks, and it is a blessing and a curse. In the eyes of someone so enamored by the variety and countless possibilities in quirks around the world, Izuku could never have been any happier to learn that he was going to have more than one quirk to train and master. But that was also where the troubles and worries came from. If you have a powerful quirk, it's natural that you would be the subject of both the awe and envy of others. That's how this world works. But what if you have more than one powerful quirk? It would have been taboo. No awe would head your way, only jealousy and scorn. It was this concern that led the family to keep the true nature of Izuku's quirk a secret. It was for Izuku's sake. Do you understand, Izuku? Hisashi asked the small child in his arms. Izuku only had a blank expression as the small hands grasping his father's shirt balled tightly into fists. I understand, Dad. Good, Hisashi said in a relieved tone as he tightly squeezed his son into a hug. Keep gift your deepest and most guarded secret, Izuku, for your own safety. The small greenet only responded blankly. My gift is a secret. Except, his quirk is a lie. A lie told to Izuku and the rest of his family by their patriarch. Izuku's real quirk is all for one, no doubt about it. It's the quirk he really inherited from his father, and just like his father, Izuku has the ability to steal and give away quirks. But Hisashi could never let him know that, so he told Izuku about gift, and he let his son believe this fantastical lie, when this whole time, he has been the one giving Izuku his quirks. Izuku's gravity manipulation quirk, his silkweave quirk, his unnamed eavesdropping quirk, each one of them were quirks that had been meticulously reviewed by Hisashi himself before being given to his son or fed to him, would be more accurate. Despite being an almost exact copy of Hisashi's quirk, a notable difference in Izuku's all-for-one was that he needed to be fed DNA from his target so he could take their quirk for himself, much like how his uncle's quirk could only be passed on after its successor ingests a piece of DNA from the predecessor. It was only because of this peculiarity in Izuku's version of all-for-one that Hisashi was able to create the illusion of quirks randomly manifesting. But Izuku can never learn of that. Izuku can never know that his beloved quirks were stolen, because Hisashi knows that it would break his son even more than having to just hide them. Just imagining Izuku learning of the truth, it would have been better if he didn't inherit Hisashi's quirk at all. As Hisashi thought about his lie, he subconsciously embraced his son tighter, as he could only repeat one thought. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. Chapter 10, Imagined Facade. It was the day after the hero's meeting with the former villain, all for one. Mirai had received the go-ahead to move into the Midoriya household, and has just arrived at the south entrance of the manor. Right now, he was standing in front of his new host family, and he was finally able to meet the family's matriarch. Good morning, Inko-san. I'm really sorry for the intrusion, and thank you for letting me live with you for a while. Mirai greeted the green-haired woman as he bowed to her. Inko just chuckled. It's no issue, Sasaki-san. I hope you feel right at home here. I'm glad to be helping the sidekick of my husband's hero friend, which is still weird to say. Mirai took pause as the matriarch said that. All for one did mention that he said Almight was an old acquaintance, but did he lie about that? Or did he lie about this? I said he was an acquaintance, but my son misinterpreted what I said and it was relayed as friend. Mirai suddenly heard the former villain's voice ring in his head and correct his assumption. Mirai subconsciously looked over to the former villain and then to the youngest Midoriya, who was excitedly bouncing up and down in his older brother's arms as he looked at Mirai. The two sons of the family were stationed a few feet back from their parents, standing just beside a few servants. To think that the small child would be this excited just seeing Mirai, who was by all means just All Might's glorified secretary, it painted an even clearer impression of the kid for Mirai. Mirai is barely in the news and only a few articles detail him as All Might's sidekick since he barely goes out in the field. He's better with paperwork and as the voice in All Might's earpiece, so that's what he's been doing. It also appeared that the child didn't even know about him until he met All Might, but he was this excited nonetheless. This kid is, Mirai was thinking to himself. Please leave all your belongings to our maids and servants. They'll take your luggages to your room and help you unpack. And then, Hisashi-kun will show you to your room and your office are. The matriarch told the hero's sidekick. I would accompany you and be a proper host if I could, but I need to leave for work today. The matriarch nervously chuckled. It did made him curious why she was in a business attire when they were only greeting him, but that clearly explains it. He just happened to arrive as she was about to leave. Well, I'm leaving now. I hope you feel right at home here, Sasaki-san. Inko gave a slight bow to Mirai, which the latter returned before they both straightened their postures. Before I leave, but Inko suddenly said. Hisashi was taken by surprise when the collar of his shirt was suddenly pulled downwards, causing him to bend his body forward and towards his wife, leaving only a few inches in between his face and hers. He then noticed that Inko was now holding the collar of his shirt, and he immediately realized what just happened. I really can just bow, Inko, Hisashi said with wide eyes as he tried his best to keep his composure, but his wife only replied with a frowning pout. Don't you dare, Hisashi-kun! I like it this way, Inko told her husband with a smile before giving him a small peck on the lips. Hisashi's face then became just a bit red, which made Inko just chuckle. But their sweet little moment was ruined when their eldest piped up with a forced bright tone. Mom and Dad do realize that it still counts as public display of affection even if just one person not part of the household is present, especially since Sasaki-san hasn't even moved into our house yet? Hisashi and Inko slowly looked over at their eldest's direction, one in a barely visibly stunned state, and one slightly annoyed, and there they saw Tenko with a forced smile as he was desperately covering his little brother's eyes while the latter was struggling with all his might to shake off the former's hand and saying stuff like I wanna see. I wanna see. Remove your hand, Tenko. Let me see. Inko narrowed her eyes at her eldest and in a stiff tone, she responded to her son's rudeness. Sometimes I wonder wherever you got that sassy attitude of yours. Tenko just widened his smile as he said in the sweetest voice he can use. I'm pretty sure I got it from you, Mom. Inko's eyes narrowed even more as their mother-son stare-down commenced, and it lasted for a good while until the youngest Midoriya suddenly began screaming out. Tenko! Tenko! I can't breathe! Your hand is covering my nose! Tenko! Izuku yelled at his brother in distress. I'm sorry, Izuku! I'm sorry! Tenko immediately apologized as he removed his hand from his brother's face, but once he did, his entire grip on his little brother also loosened, allowing Izuku the chance to jump off from his brother's arms and go running behind their father. Izuku furrowed his brows and pouted from behind their father's legs as he stuck his tongue out in defiance of his brother. The devastated expression on Tenko's face was all anyone needed to see how much he regretted earning his brother's anger. Inko just chuckled at her son's antics before realizing that she was still holding down her husband's collar this whole time, and she apologized as she let him go. I'm sorry too, Hisashi-kun. I'll let you go now. Hisashi just cleared his throat to regain his composure before giving his wife a small peck on the lips back and wishing her a safe drive. Take care, Inko. I'll see all of you later, Inko told her family as she began walking towards the family car, but at the last minute, she assigned a task to her eldest. Tenko, watch over the house, okay? Tenko couldn't help himself and chuckled, so Mom was still worried after all. The remaining Midoriyas and Mirai then watched as the light silver car drove away from their view. Izuku, come on, I'll bring you over to the training hall before I go to my etiquette classes so Dad and Sasaki-san can go on their tour. The eldest son told his little brother as he took a few steps towards him, but the youngest just frowned at his older brother and even stuck his tongue out defiantly one more time before hiding behind their father's legs again. No! I'm still angry at you, Tenko! The little boy hissed. You almost made me asphyxiate! Asphyxiate? Did you mean asphyxiate? Tenko asked to correct his little brother. Yeah. That. I'm still mad. Izuku puffed up his cheeks as he frowned before continuing. That's why I'm going to stay with Dad and Sir Night-Eye for now. Tenko had to stop a laugh and hide a smirk that subconsciously formed on his face. Relief washed over Tenko as he realized that his little brother didn't truly hate him and that this was all partly a ploy to spend more time with his idol's sidekick. He felt a little better. In that case, I guess there's nothing I can do, Tenko said as he feigned despondence. I'll go ahead to my classes now. I'll see you later, little brother. Hope you enjoy your day. Izuku noticed the slight smirk on his older brother's face as the latter turned around and began walking away. That, along with the enjoy your day that sounded a bit more happy and sly, immediately clued Izuku in about his brother's true intentions. He almost smiled in delight at his brother, but he managed to stop himself, and instead, he just voiced his gratitude in his thoughts. Thank you, Tenko. Hisashi had stayed silent as he listened in and watched as his two sons colluded on a scheme on him. He tried to stop a sigh from coming out, but all he could do was try to hide it. Has almost 15 years of parenting wore you down, Midoriya Dano? A certain hero's sidekick's sarcastic question caused the two remaining Midoriyas to look over to his direction. Is that the impression you have? Hisashi queried rhetorically as he wore a bored expression. The hero's sidekick only responded by fixing the position of his glasses. Mirai then looked over to the small child still hiding behind his father's legs, already bouncing up and down again as he looked at his fellow greenet with excitement and glee. You could almost see a halo of light coming from the tiny child. Sir! How is it being All Might's sidekick? The tiny greenet stuttered multiple times, not because of nervousness or shyness, rather, he was just incredibly excited. Is it fun? What do you do as All Might's sidekick? How did you become All Might's sidekick? The tiny greenet shot out a barrage of All Might's sidekick-related questions, but before Mirai could answer, the small greenet was scooped up and carried by his father. Izuku, you're supposed to be training today, aren't you? Do you want me or one of the servants to bring you to the training hall? Hisashi asked the little boy in his arms, causing the greenet to wince a bit, and he pouted. But I didn't get the chance to talk to Sir Night Eye yesterday at all, and I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask him, and stuff I wanted him to show me, and stuff I wanted to show him, so. The little greenet's voice trailed off at the end as he knew his dad would probably say no. Izuku, Sasaki-san will be staying with us for the next few weeks. I'm sure you'll get the chance to ask your questions. Hisashi tried to explain to his son, but Izuku pouted even more as he sheepishly began playing with the collar of his father's shirt. I know, but can I at least come with you to bring Sir to his room? Then I'll go with a servant to the training hall after. The little boy sheepishly requested. Izuku. Hisashi spoke in a stern voice. Please, Dad? Izuku begged his father, as he wrapped his comparatively small arms around the latter's neck and gave him a hug. I promise I won't make any trouble. Hisashi placed his hand on the back of his youngest son's head, and he just let out a sigh of defeat. I spoil you too much. Then you should also ask Sasaki-san if he's okay with you coming, Hisashi told his son. Without letting go of the embrace he had on the former villain, Izuku turned his head towards Mirai to look at him, and with a pleading look in his eyes, he asked, Is it alright, Sasaki-san? Mirai just looked at the small greenet with a neutral expression as he hid what he thought, as he analyzed the scene that had unraveled before him, the fair and equal footing between Hisashi and his wife, and the former's gentle disposition towards his youngest son, and even his seeming leniency to both of his children. It seems to match the description Mirai heard from All Might and Gran Torino of All for One's method to deceive surface-level benevolence, and the ability to perfectly embody the image he wants his victims to see of him, twisting it all around to make himself look like the perfect family man. It's highly likely that Hisashi Midoriya really is just a facade, a mask that he wears for and in front of his family, and in truth, his real view of his family are simple tools, pawns for the larger play he has. In that case, then he feels bad for the villain's family that got caught up in his schemes. But then, why doesn't it seem that way to Mirai? Why does it feel genuine to him? Is the all-for-one he's always heard of before just this good at manipulation and deception that even Mirai is fooled despite what he knows of the villain? It makes sense. But if his goal was to deceive All Might, why a family? There are much more efficient ways to do it. Could he have a different goal then? Multiple goals? Mirai isn't sure yet. The hero's sidekick then responded to the small child's request. Yes. Please accompany us for a little while. Izuku immediately perked up, and he regained the bright expression that he had earlier. Thank you very much, Sasaki-san. It's not a big issue really, Mirai replied. Mirai supposed that it's only been 2 days since he met Hisashi Midoriya. He'll get the chance to know him more in the following weeks. Chapter 11, Sidekick's Warning. It was quiet. Too quiet, awkward, and tense for Izuku, making him wonder why he even asked to come with his dad in the first place. Then he remembered. It was to spend more time around Sir Night-Eye. But despite that, he can't even ask a single question since he promised he wasn't going to make any trouble for his dad and the hero's sidekick. In the end, Izuku could only let out a sigh and resumed sheepishly staring back at Sir Night-Eye, who was walking behind him and his father. The small greenet began lightly kicking his feet in the air in boredom, and he began playing with the edge of the back collar of his dad's shirt. Izuku! His dad suddenly called his name, causing the greenet to perk up, and he looked over to his dad to respond. Yeah, Dad? Izuku responded. Did you want to ask Sir Night-Eye a question? If he's okay with answering one, you can ask him. His dad told Izuku. Yeah? Izuku could only respond as he looked at his dad in confusion, then what his dad said finally registered in his head. Really? Izuku asked to make sure, and his dad nodded and looked back at Sir Night-Eye like it was like a signal, and the hero's sidekick nodded as he fixed the position of his glasses. If it's a question I can answer, I don't see why not. He told the little greenet with a tone in his voice like he had just been convinced to do so a moment ago. Izuku's eyes immediately began to glitter at the chance he was given, and he immediately gave his thanks before excitedly asking the hero's sidekick. Yes, sir, what is your quirk? And how do you use your quirk to help as All Might's sidekick? But then he immediately backtracked and shrunk as he realized his mistake. That was 2 questions, sorry. Izuku heard his dad stop a chuckle before he felt his dad's fingers run through his green hair and begin to caress his head in an effort to comfort him. It's alright, Sir Night-Eye replied. I can answer like it was just 1 question. My quirk is called Foresight. By touching my target and making eye contact with them, I can see the actions they will take in the future in a third-person point of view. Mirai explained how his quirk functioned, but before he continued with the explanation of how he utilizes his quirk as All Might's sidekick, he looked back at the small child's father and glared at him. Izuku saw a slight smirk appear on his dad's face in the corner of his eye, but he forgot about it as soon as Sir Night-Eye resumed. I act as reconnaissance for any large-scale operations we have. Depending on the information we may need, I make contact with the suspects undercover and extract the info from their future, may it be the location or directions to hideouts and bases, confirmation of suspected related parties or victims, or just the amount of security in their base. Other than that, however, I am simply All Might's secretary, handling the paperwork his agency is mandated to submit to the Hero Public Safety Commission. Mirai finished his answer as he fixed the position of his glasses again. He looked back at the small greenet in the former villain's arms, but almost flinched when he saw an unmistakable look in his emerald green eyes, almost obsessive in nature. He felt creeped out by it, but he dismissed that feeling. How? The small greenet then asked another question. How far into the future can you see? It's virtually limitless, though the further into the future I look, the less clear the details are. Mirai answered truthfully as he averted gazes with the small greenet, and not thinking about where the question would be heading. Can you use your quirk on me? And see if I become a great hero? Hisashi suddenly stopped as soon as his son asked that question, causing Mirai to stop in his tracks as well. He could tell the former was just as surprised by the question as him, if not more, and he couldn't help but look at the small child staring at him. The hero's sidekick then looked over to the small child's father, almost like he was asking, Are you gonna allow me? But he didn't receive any response. Mirai could see resolve in the serious gaze the small greenet had locked on him. He was resolute in seeing his question answered. He supposed he understood why. After all, he was in the kid's position at some point in the past too, wanting to know if he would be enough to become All Might's sidekick, or even a hero at all. Even if the kid in front of him didn't know his unique circumstances, he should still be worried about whether or not he'd reach his dreams in the future. Everyone is like that. But even so, Mirai couldn't help but feel worried. What if he looked, and he didn't see this kid as a hero, but as a villain? What if he looked and saw All for One back in power with this kid with both his kids by his side? It seems unlikely at the moment, but what if? If he sees a future that he doesn't want to see, that he doesn't want to happen, and that he cannot prevent, what would he do? What can he do? He knows very well that anything he sees through his foresight is bound to happen no matter what he does. What if he sees a future where everything went to shit, and he can't do anything about it because he has already foretold it? What if fulfilling a small child's innocent request is what dooms all of Japan? All of the world? What if this kid? Ahem. The Midoriya family's patriarch cleared his throat, snapping Mirai out of his spiraling thoughts. Izuku, you don't need Sasaki-san to look, do you? There's no doubt you'll become a hero, Hisashi assured his son as he messed up the latter's green hair. The small child just looked back at his dad and sheepishly pouted. I guess, but I'm just really excited. I really want to know badly, the small child gushed. But he immediately backtracked as he realized something he did. I asked 2 extra questions, is that bad? Hisashi just chuckled and placed his hand behind his son's head before pulling the child closer to him and letting the latter lay his head on his shoulder. Don't worry. You're okay. Are you satisfied with the questions you asked, Izuku? His dad asked him, to which Izuku sweetly smiled. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Sasaki-san. He thanked both of them. Hisashi put on a neutral smile as he gently caressed his son's green hair, and he resumed leading the way to the hero's sidekick's new room. Mirai wanted to let out a sigh of relief as he took a step to follow behind the former villain and his son, but for some reason, he wasn't able to. His chest felt so tight, like something invisible was crushing his heart and lungs. He couldn't even draw a single breath of air to relieve the sudden pressure. No. It wasn't just inside of him. It was all around him, an intense pressure that made the air around him feel non-existent. A pressure that seemed hellbent to crush him into the ground. A pressure that he couldn't have been mistaken was all coming from one direction. Mirai tried to raise his head and catch his gaze up with the former villain, but he immediately froze as he heard his voice so loud and clear in his head. Mirai Sasaki. He couldn't help but flinch again. The way his name was said with so much malice and revulsion, it almost made Mirai hate his own name, puke and retch at the sound of his own name. It would have been enough to taint each character in his name and forever defile their meaning. And if he hadn't felt suffocated enough before, the pressure in and around him felt like it had doubled. His vision started to blur, and all he could make out around him were abstract shapes. I have remained quiet despite your constant insults and negative thoughts towards me today, but I will not allow you to think so lowly of my son or anyone else in my family. I will not care that I was the one to offer a ceasefire. I will discard our truce the moment you step out of line. He was at his limit. He was at the verge of losing his consciousness. He got careless. He should have realized it before. No, he did realize it, but he disregarded the thought as soon as he met the former villain's family once again, and he lowered his guard. He might be there to keep an eye on All for One, but he was also being watched and monitored by the villain, watching his every move to protect his family. Mirai should never forget the person he's keeping an eye on is still All for One. Then at that instant, the pressure Mirai had felt suddenly disappeared, leaving the hero's sidekick confused. Mirai Sasaki? The voice almost seemed to echo in Mirai's head even though it was no longer a mental message, and he flinched. He slowly looked back up and saw that the former villain and his son were already a few good feet away from him. He tried hiding the terror in his face, but he didn't know how effective it was, or if it was even working at all. He was probably as pale as a ghost right then. Sir Nightai, are you alright? Mirai's eyes probably became even wider than they already were before as his yellow eyes met the kid's bright emerald eyes. How is he okay? Was all he could think as he saw how unaffected the little boy was. Did he not sense the aura of bloodlust his own father just let out a moment ago? Did All for One only intend Mirai to feel it? But Mirai could tell from the sudden loss of nearby murmurs that the servants in their vicinity also felt it as well, so how? Sir? The little kid asked Mirai again, urging Mirai to snap out of his trance and focus back to the present. I am alright, just sudden ly feel ingl light-headed, that's all. Mirai slurred his words. It felt like all his stamina had been drained away from him. Dad, I think Sir isn't feeling too good. Maybe we should get the nurses over here? The little boy asked his dad. He's starting to look really pale. The former villain hummed as he thought, and maybe it was just Mirai's imagination, but he could almost hear a playful yet sinister tone from the villain. Maybe we should. The former villain then pointed to a pair of nearby servants, and ordered them to rush over to the property's infirmary to call a nurse or two. In the end, Mirai had to be brought into one of the nearby rooms to have him sit down while they waited for the nurses to come and treat him. Other than that, however, they proceeded with the rest of the tour to the hero's sidekick's new room and office without any other hiccup. Chapter 12, Surveillance Log. It has been 2 weeks since Mirai moved in with the Midoriya family, the family of the former villain, all for one. It hasn't been too long of a period, so there's nothing big that he could take note of yet, but he's gotten to learn a bit more about the daily life in the family's castle or manor or home. When Team Almight was first looking into the Midoriya family, they learned that the matriarch Inko is the breadwinner, running her multinational corporation Green Hill Coffee House that she founded almost 17 years ago. It shocked them to learn that All for One is married to a semi-public figure, yet they never caught him in their radar. But after thinking about it, since he himself wasn't a public person, they supposed they shouldn't be too surprised. All for One, Hisashi himself, is a stay-at-home husband and father, and while anyone would immediately assume that he does nothing every single day since they have servants all around attending to his family's needs as well as their entire home, it wasn't the case at all, as Mirai learned. Due to the sheer size of the Midoriya family's property, and the number of small facilities in it, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to call their home a small fief. About 10% of their current staff had come with them from America, with half of them bringing along their own families. About half of the total staff were also relatives of each other, or if not, were close family friends. Some are siblings or cousins, and some are even married. To make things easier and more efficient for the staff to serve the family, they were given their own living space in the property where their dependents also lived. Managing the expenses for running the facilities in the property, like a vegetable farm, a small barn, and small mills for power and electricity, as well as the accounting for the salaries for the servants and other monetary responsibilities, was all left to the family patriarch, Hisashi. He was also in charge of going through the daily and weekly reports brought to him by the managers of the various sectors of the manor, making sure everything was running smoothly. In addition, he is in charge of watching over his son's studies. He was the one who sought out the best school in Tokyo for his eldest son, Tenko, and made sure to send a generous donation to assure they will properly look over him in his stead. He is also the one who looks through and hires the private tutors for his youngest son, though he has the last say in the weekly modules Izuku has to go through. He also personally supervises his youngest son's training sessions. All in all, the former villain isn't as free as he first appeared to be. Toshinori had confided in Mirai and Sorahiko that he felt like they had visited a small kingdom after their first visit to their home, to which the two of them thought he was exaggerating, but there was no doubt left in Mirai now. This place is practically a dukedom. Mirai had yelled numerous times in his thoughts every time he had to recount his notes and observations for his surveillance logs. The green-haired sidekick couldn't help but let out a sigh as he closed his laptop after he finished typing out his second log entry and sent them to All Might and Gran Torino. They had agreed that he would be sending in one surveillance log every week to minimize the sidekick's workload, since he was still working as All Might's secretary in addition to keeping an eye on All for One. The only exception to this agreement was if there was an emergency or an incident that was imperative the two heroes learn about. Mirai looked over to the digital clock in the left side of his desk and saw the time. 11:58 a.m., almost lunchtime, which meant that any second now, he would be receiving a knock at the door informing him so. And just in time, he received a knock. Mirai stood up from his chair and walked over to the door, and when he pulled it open, he was greeted by a familiar blond man with a blue complexion. The servant that always came to inform him whenever breakfast, lunch, or dinner was about to be ready. This man is also the person Hisashi appointed as a messenger or intermediary between them if either of them wished to communicate with each other, but was not available at the moment. This man's name is Adohira Yasuda, and though his official job title is the family chauffeur, from how the other servants act around him and how the managers of the fee for household refer to him, Mirai could tell he was in an even higher position overall. If Mirai were to give him a more accurate title, it would probably be a supervisor or an overseer, maybe even all-for-one secretary or errand man. Sasaki-san, dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. The master, as well as young Master Tenko and young Master Izuku will be present. Will you be there as well? The man asked him with the same judgmental glare he always has when he looks at Mirai. He also said the same thing he always says when he comes to inform Mirai of the upcoming meal. The same words and the same tone, though the time and the people present do change when it wasn't the case. It always felt to Mirai like it was read off a script or like it was an action that had been programmed into the man, and it unnerved the hero's sidekick during his first 3 days living there and meeting the man, though now, he's understood it as the man just not liking him at all. I'll be there, Mirai replied as he returned the glare the blue-complexioned chauffeur had been giving him. The chauffeur seemed to let out a slight scoff before walking away. From what Mirai figured, it seemed like the animosity the man has towards him stemmed from the fact that he knows the true reason Mirai was staying in the Midoriya household to keep an eye on the family patriarch. Since he was assigned as their intermediary, he had to know the truth about their circumstances, though Mirai doesn't believe he knows that their employer is actually the former overlord of Japan's Underworld. Coupled with how the former villain has been running his small fief, giving his staff their own living spaces in the property where their family can stay, as well as giving them incredibly generous salaries in the man's perspective. Mirai was probably a crooked hero who was suspecting his benevolent benefactor and accusing him of crimes he would never commit. Add in how their employer had volunteered to be surveilled by the heroes like he has nothing to hide, it probably implicated Mirai even more. Truthfully, Mirai felt a tiny bit of pity towards the man that was tricked by All for One. Adohira also apparently has a sister who works for the family to a twin, though Mirai hasn't seen nor met her yet, at least, to his knowledge. Mirai mentally shook his thoughts away as he found himself getting carried away with them again. Then he made his way to the dining room.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.